Laurence Gilman is the former assistant general manager of the Vancouver Canucks, NHL executive with the Leafs, Jets, and Coyotes. He joins us on Wednesdays, and we've been at no loss, my friend, for discussion points and even at the management level here with these Vancouver Canucks. Thanks for taking the time, Laurence. First question, what did you make of Tocchet's departure and his explanation?
Well, in the last week or so, the silence became deafening to me. And when there was such inactivity, I began to switch my position in that I had thought that Rick Tocchet and the Canucks were going to come to an agreement. But after the press conference of last week, where, amongst other things, the Quinn Hughes issue came up, and Rick Tocchet was nowhere to be seen, I began to figure out that this is probably not going to end with a consummated agreement. And if you think about it, it makes sense. I mean, you've got the reigning Jack Adams Trophy winning coach, and a coming off a season of dysfunction of epic proportion. You got a team that has serious questions down the middle of its lineup. You got a number one center that didn't perform as a number one center. You don't have a number two center, a bona fide number two center. Filipino question mark. You don't know what's happening with Pius Suter. Your defense and your goaltending are fine, but your number one player, who's one of the best defensemen in the National Hockey League, has pretty much put the organization on notice that he's not going to stick around in the next 3 years if the team isn't competitive. At the same time, you got 6 other coaching vacancies in the National Hockey League, 3 of which are U.S.-based Original Six franchises. And Rick Tocchet has to be arguably the number 2 candidate for any of those jobs behind Mike Sullivan. So if you're him, are you really going to fix your wagon to the situation that you have in Vancouver for the next 4, 5, 6 years, whatever the case may be? Or are you going to leverage, the work that you've done in the last couple of years and the acknowledgments of such, and go out and find a place that's going to be more stable and has better upside?
Let me just pick up on something you said. Do you think Rutherford laying the Hughes issue bare last week played into this decision?
I don't know that it necessarily, the fact that Jim Rutherford spoke about it publicly, I don't know that it necessarily, swayed Rick Tocchet. I think the fact that clearly they have an issue with this player that they know about, and Rutherford's mentioning it, alluded or revealed that fact. I think that was not a small factor at all in Rick Tocchet's decision to not, commit long term to the Vancouver Canucks.
I'm 40% there, and I'm 40% general dysfunction. Like he has to feel that while this year was particularly bad, that he could see similar stuff coming down the pike here with this organization. Like, I don't think he would necessarily look at this and go, this was a bad year, but it all went to pot. It'll be better this year. Like, I would bet he fears what is next around this corner.
Well, we talked about that a little bit last week in my segment with you guys, where they have their work cut out for them. They really do. To solidify their team up front, and particularly down the middle, is no small feat. And it's not coming, and Jim Rutherford stated, it's not coming in the form of free agency. So the only other way it's going to happen is by trading something, and you're not getting players of that significance to your roster without giving up something of significance from your organization. And it's like I said, that's a tall order. And if you're him and you're assessing the lay of the land, it's probably a better option to go see what else is out there. And if what Jim Rutherford said is true, and there's no reason to believe he wasn't telling the truth because he speaks incredibly candidly. Rick Tocchet wants to be on the eastern side of the United States. That's where his family is located. And that makes sense. There's some great coaching opportunities that exist in eastern cities.
Mm. The tone is set at the top of any company, any organization. Is the worst thing that happened to the Francesco Aquilini ownership the success that you guys had? That, a handful of years after he puts his money into this company, they have profound success, and maybe think that that's the norm and that it's easy and that they know how to do this now, that they know. Did that scar ownership and create a monster, if you will, in terms of how they run this team from there on in?
Well, I can't really answer that. I do think, I made the joke alluding to the fact that, we did have a lot of success and there wasn't a whole lot of missing the playoffs when we were there. But the fact is, there has been a great deal of instability in that organization for whatever it's been, 10 years or so now. We've gone through 4 coaches in the last 5 or 6 years, whatever it's been.
4 years, yeah.
You've 2 different general managers now, and you got a president of hockey operations come and go, and you got a revolving door on the dressing room. So it's clearly instability isn't something that organizations that have success genuinely elicit. And in this case, it probably factored into Rick Tocchet's decision, but again, I can't really speak for him.
What stuck out for you in Jim Rutherford's explanation yesterday?
In some sense, I felt that there was a little bit of bewilderment on his behalf. Where do we turn to here? I know he put on a brave face, and you have to do that in this business. But this is a very, very critical event. In a year of a number of critical events that have befallen this, this hockey operations department, and you put on a brave face and you move forward. But obviously, he expressed disappointment that Rick Tocchet was leaving. I certainly feel that was genuine. And he knows that they have a big task that they, quite frankly, need to get right. They need to get the right person, the right coach in place so that they can shepherd this team through the choppy waters that appear to be ahead of them.
I got a text yesterday from one of you people, and by you people, I mean a lawyer, who said to me, well, he always calls
it's
us
true,
you people. I'm just
Turnabout is fair play.
the you people.
Yeah.
A lawyer who said to me, why in the hell would they have structured this contract with an option if they weren't prepared to enforce it, particularly since they structured the Boudreau contract with an option, and that proved messy for them in the end as well. Do you have any explanation there, lawyer to lawyer, called to the Manitoba and North Dakota bar, if I'm not mistaken, Laurence?
Minnesota bar.
Minnesota, my bad. I'll put
Let's
myself
get that
in.
right.
Okay.
Which I'm currently still a member of. So
if there are lakes nearby, he's called to that bar.
I don't know that I've ever been involved in a coaching contract that had an option, but it does happen from time to time. But it definitely complicated things. I think if they had to go back in time, they would have wished that option year was an additional fixed year, and it wouldn't, they wouldn't be in the pickle that they're in today. But there's lots of times organizations do seek options. I have signed contracts where the club has had an option on me, and I have experienced having those options exercised when I wasn't thrilled about it. But I'm not a coach in the National Hockey League, and again, I said this to you people multiple times. I just don't believe you can have a coach in a Canadian market on a 1-year contract. It just doesn't lend itself to success within the team and the dressing room.
You said that you thought that Tocchet would be number 2 on a lot of those spots, but of course now the Vancouver Canucks are in that market now, shopping in the same pools that the likes of the New York Rangers and such are shopping for. Does anybody, if you're the manager, if you're Jim Rutherford right now, does anybody get you excited about coaching your team right now, or should everybody immediately become fans of the Florida Panthers in hopes that John Cooper shakes free, which I don't actually believe would happen, but some people are putting that out there.
Well, John Cooper might shake free, but again, is John Cooper going to come to the Vancouver Canucks and fix his wagon to the instability that currently exists? I don't know what they're going to do. I think you clearly have to, again, Jim Rutherford is a veteran hockey manager. He's not going to do anything rash. He's not going to do anything quickly, although, you are competing with 6 other teams in terms of, candidates that are out there.
And maybe more soon, right? Maybe more.
For sure. And it's a critical hire in the sense that you need someone who's going to be a leader, and be able to direct these players and this team through what is potentially going to be an unstable situation. I'm certain they'll fix some aspects of their center ice position. I mean, they'll get centers for sure. How competent they're going to be, who knows? But you're definitely going to want a leader, particularly after all the dressing room drama and things that happened this last year. You're going to want someone who's of strong moral fiber and character to lead this group going forward.
You have personal experience with Manny Malhotra. He's running the Abbotsford Canucks right now, has them in the second round of the playoffs, and he was there in Toronto as well as an assistant. A word or two on whether or not you think Manny is ready, because he was named as a candidate yesterday.
Well, I've said before, I think Manny will coach in the National Hockey League at some point. Being candid, my appetite for risk on putting in a coach that does not have that much head coaching experience into a position such as the Canucks at this point in time, I think has a higher degree of a risk than I would be comfortable with. I would also caution Manny that, if I were representing him, that you don't necessarily want to take the first one offered to you. You want to take the right one offered to you. And as I've said before, like players, coaches don't get hurt by staying in the American Hockey League an extra year. So I think if I were involved in the process, I think you obviously have to consider Manny and you have to talk to him, but I don't think it's in Manny's best interest or the Canucks' best interest to necessarily have him as a head coach at this time. But again, let me state, I fully believe that Manny will be a coach in the National Hockey League at some point in his future.
What about Peter Laviolette? Jim Rutherford said, quote, "It's a good name," when it was brought up to him yesterday.
Well, I watched John Shannon on your podcast yesterday, and I feel the same way he does. He's not my cup of tea in terms of a coach and his coaching style and what I've seen and heard from him. But he is a veteran coach. He is a Stanley Cup winning coach, and I'm not. So he's definitely a legitimate coach, and he would definitely have grabbed the attention of the players. That's for certain.
How much are you worried about catering to the players? Like, you do want to cater to the players, but you also don't want the inmates running the asylum per se. What's the tone that you want to strike here with this coach in terms of making sure that gets along with Elias Pettersson, maybe gets the best out of Elias Pettersson, but isn't a coddler per se as well?
Well, today's modern coach is far different than the historical gruff, NHL coach that operates out of fear. You can
just say Mike Babcock if you want. It's all right.
You can't.
It's a safe space.
You can't deal with modern players like that today. You have to be a communicator. You have to get them to buy in. Those are key elements to a successful coach and a successful coaching staff. Because I don't want to undersell the importance of the assistant coaches, because they complement the head coach, and you can get a head coach that is weak in some areas and surround him with assistants that are strong in others. And you have to have a strong staff all the way around. Again, I think I've said it to you many times. I believe strongly players play, coaches coach, managers manage, and owners own. So I wouldn't be utilizing the players in the selection of the coach, but you have to keep in mind that you need someone who's going to get the most out of their players, whether that's Elias Pettersson or whether that's Quinn Hughes or whether that's anybody else for that matter.
Laurence, how worried should a Canucks fan be right now?
Well, I mean, this has been a chaotic season for them. And, there's a gaping hole currently as it sits in the roster in one of the most critically important areas, which is your center ice position. They have to fix the problem with their number one center, which I've maintained. I believe that is certainly something that they're capable of. But you need to go out and, get two centers as of right now. If you're assuming that, Hedl is injured and, may not come back, although I suspect he will. And you don't have a third center. They, as I've said multiple times, they have their work cut out for them. They don't look, absent those maneuvers, they don't appear to be a playoff team next year as they sit today. So would I be concerned if I were a fan? I wouldn't be happy about their fortunes at this point in time. But again, you have solid management in place that it's not their first rodeo, as I've said, again, multiple times, and that they will execute and improve the hockey club over the summer. As I said, they know what the issues are in front of them. I thought Jim Rutherford last week articulated that very, very clearly. They have a plan, and now they just need to go out and execute on it.
Nothing's impossible, but given where they are right now, if they make the playoffs next year, is that an impressive feat, given where they are right now?
I would say so. I mean, you've got teams below the playoff line that are improving rapidly. You know, Calgary came pretty much out of nowhere to make the playoffs. The Anaheim Ducks were pretty good in the latter part of the season. And the teams above them, I don't necessarily see falling out of the race anytime soon. So they do have their work cut out for them. But, you know, if they have a healthy goaltending for the entire season, they've clearly improved their defense this past year. Canucks fans should feel very good about that. But they've got to, you know, hit right on the center ice position going forward. And they need other forwards as well, particularly if they let Brock Besser and his 25 to 30 goals walk out the door.
This is less of a question, Laurence. I'm just going to throw a whole bunch of facts at you, and then you respond as you want to respond. But J-Pat tweeted this yesterday. 1 year ago, in the second round of the playoffs, taking the Oilers to the brink with a third-string goaltender, the Norris and Jack Adams winner, 6 All-Stars, 2 top 2 centermen amongst those All-Stars, rehabilitated Brock Besser and Connor Garland, both having fantastic seasons, and of course, Thatcher Demko the next season. A year from now, look where they're at.
Well, it's a shocking, fall for sure. And again, some of it was circumstantial. Injuries played a role, without a doubt. Obviously, what occurred in their dressing room was something that's highly irregular and rarely occurs in professional sport or in our industry. I'd say 2 years ago or last season, everything that could go right went right. And this year it seemed that everything that could go wrong went wrong. So I don't think, at any given point in time, a team is never as good or as bad as it's playing at that particular moment in time. And, a year ago, they probably weren't as good as they actually performed. And this year, I don't think they're as bad as they performed. So going into next season, hope springs eternal, right? In training camps. So they make a few moves here and there. There isn't any reason they can't be a competitive team and at least competing for a Stanley Cup playoff position next season.
We'll probably drill down on this at some point later. And this seems completely rash, but we're just hear us out because we've tried to grapple with this very uncomfortable question. Is there any part of you that would consider, if you're the manager here, trading Quinn Hughes now, this summer, rather than trying to salvage all this over the course of the next 12 months?
Well, it depends on what actually has transpired between the player and the organization. And
only they know for sure.
Yeah, if you feel pretty strongly that this guy's going to walk out the door in 2 years, it would behoove you to at least listen. Particularly if the New Jersey Devils, let's say, come knocking and say, okay, we're interested in taking him. How can we frame this? Because you're going to get more for him now than you're going to get.
That's it.
Right? So, but that being said, and this has been said by many people, this is the best defenseman that's ever played for the Vancouver Canucks.
100%.
It's a pretty strong, move to decide that you're going to part ways with that player because, the old adage is he who gets the best player wins the trade. And, you might get a bushel of assets, but you are giving up like a franchise player in that transaction.
Media gets portrayed as, trying to get guys out of the city all the time. This is the opposite of that. No one's trying to get this guy out of the city, but
not media. Yeah. You people.
That's right.
I think that's a great expression. And by the way, I borrowed
it's Pat Quinn's.
Quinn.
It's Pat Quinn's. It's Pat Quinn's. I first encountered it when I was covering him with the Leafs, although it may have predated his tenure with coaching the Leafs. It may have been a Vancouver thing or an LA thing, or even a Philly thing going way back. When the questions were coming and getting a little hotter, Pat would rear back and drop a "you people" at the scrum. And it was, and in his later years, when he was a little more grandfatherly after his heart scare and what, it was usually a moment of great amusement for everyone. In the early days, it was a little more grizzly bear. I can attest to that. Anyways, we'll talk to you and your people next Wednesday. Thank you, Laurence. Appreciate this.
Thanks, guys.